1, 2, 3.
Welcome at the Media Center Ukraine. I am Olga Temanova. 11th year into the war. Today is the day number 825 of the full-scale invasion of the Russian aggressor into our land. Unfortunately, during this full-scale invasion, we are aware that almost 20% of our territories have been affected by the hostilities. Thousands of the Ukrainians have been deported. Part of them are still taken captive. Their housing has been looted or destroyed. Currently, we are facing a situation when the occupied territories have been heavily mined. Today, you have been invited to talk about the major challenges of the deoccupied territories. We'll be talking about civilian hostages, war crime investigations, destroyed housing, and destroyed infrastructure. Today, we are joined by different speakers, both government and non-governmental organizations, including international representatives. We have been joined by Maria Mezentseva, head of the parliamentary delegation of the Ukrainian parliament at the PACE. Iryna Korobko is the spokesperson for the European Union Advisory Mission. Oleksandr Tolokonnikov is joining us online. He is the head of the Department of Internal and Information Policy at the Kherson Regional Military Administration. Here with us is Khrystyna Shkudor, where our People Campaign Advocacy Manager at the PR Army NGO. Oleksandra Romantsova is the acting Executive Director of the Center for Civil Liberties. Ms. Khrypun is the co-founder of the NGO Civilians in Captivity. Welcome, everybody. Maria, I hope you are hearing and seeing us. Well, welcome, dear. I thought I would say ladies, but gentlemen and ladies. I am pleased that this balance has been balanced. I greet you through the hero city of Kharkiv because of the very sad circumstances. I have been joining you online, but I have updated information that I have brought back from the sitting at Vilnius, and I would like to share with you new priorities that have been singled out for its activities for the next 6 months by the Parliamentary Assembly. To remind you, this organization comprises 46 countries. It was for 2 days that the Council had been working on the agenda for the upcoming summer agenda. When we talk about the reconstruction of Ukraine and justice and war crimes in general, of course, we believe it to be a very important thing for the international tribunals to be set up, but the most serious investigations are having to do with different crimes, including missing persons and missing civilians. If we talk about the categories of different military servicemen, if he or she understands and is aware where he was serving, where he was supposed to be. But the cases with the civilian hostages, this information is sometimes lacking for years. We have underlined at the speech of the Lithuanian Minister of Foreign Affairs, a country that will be presiding over the work of 46 foreign ministers. We suggested that the priority of the work should include the return of all hostages, illegally held hostages, deported population. Today we are talking about civilians in the first place, including Ukrainian children, but in general we are talking about civilians in captivity. The minister has backed up my suggestion, and together with the NGOs of Ukraine and the government of Ukraine, we'll be working on these issues at the level of the new ideas and new perspectives of how to implement that into life. Let me remind you that the Ukrainian delegation at the European Union Parliamentary Assembly has conducted a number of public awareness campaigns, including relatives of and children of combatants and non-combatants who have been held in captivity, those who have come back and those whose relatives are still in search. This gives a new and fresh information, including the understanding of the disaster that Ukraine has been facing since 2014. It was yesterday that I was addressed by an NGO from the United States, referring, by the way, to the site at your Ukrinform agency. And they said that they were willing to join the advocacy campaign in regard of the situation that today 403 Ukrainian women are held captive in the Russian Federation. Of course, their rights have been grossly breached, the way they are held and including other issues, including the circumstances of their detention. Such referrals cannot be ignored. More to the point, this organization has come up with ideas of more updated way to follow, including the celebrities from media, cinema, and other fields. It will be very exciting to work with them. As the PACA expertise shows, the relatives of people who have been coming back, they're sharing their personal histories. They seem to be working much more effective than the speeches and sound bites of the policymakers. Of course, every one of us knows such histories, but in general, I believe it makes sense to continue such advocacy campaigns. And my colleagues from 46 countries, including ministers and deputies, members of the Parliament of Europe, are ready to join their forces. I have touched upon the priorities for the next 6 months, and we would like you to join in our effort. This has been officially green-lighted. The next session will take place in late June, and as we have been talking with some of you, we'll be able to include into the text of resolution what we think makes sense, our new approaches, how to call on the world community to make Russia live up to what the country has signed. The next topic that has been voiced today is the restoration of the housing. Let me report back for those viewers that we have seen the fruits of our efforts in Ukraine and in Geneva. We have set up an office of the Register of the damages and compensations for the destroyed housing. We are currently working on how to share the information from the prosecutor institutions from Ukraine to The Hague for that information to be verified, the issue of the war crimes. It's very good that we have not been constricted to the material damages, but such allegations include war crimes, including rape, sexual violence, deportations. That is to say that under categories of people have been included into what we are going to discuss today. Of course, it's a disaster for every personal life, but it cannot be gauged with money. Our partners at The Hague have seen now more than 1,000 applications through the DEAR application. We call on all persons engaged to register and to report on the damages, both material and non-material losses. Personally, I would like to add that our delegation to PACE includes 24 Ukrainian parliamentarians. We are cooperating with different headquarters at different Ukrainian regions, including Mykolaiv, Vinnytsia region, etc. And we are planning to set up such regional centers to make sure that the relatives are aware what the unified register of the missing persons is. It includes so far 38,000 persons. Both internal Ministry of Ukraine and external are working on this. We are working to set up a database including children, prisoners of war, and civilian hostages. The lawyers and our colleagues are heavily engaged in that work. Everybody who is trying to verify and update the data. These centers have been able to return thousands of people, but what we are seeing now is that we should exert more and more pressure because the prisoners of war swaps and civilian swaps have been halted. Perhaps I have abused some time, but in a nutshell, this is the freshest information on the parliamentary dimension and the interparliamentary activities. We thank you, ma'am, for this exhausting report. I would like, Ms. Iryna, to turn to you. The European Union Advisory Mission is working in the deoccupied territories. What have you been witnessing there? What are the programs that are infected currently? Welcome, colleagues. First, I thank you for the invitation. I thank you for the fact that we are looking into such an important issue. I would like to underline that the European Union Advisory Group has seen a stable support of Ukraine starting in 2014. It was then that the European Union started to back up Ukraine, both in the area of reforming of the law enforcement, and this has resulted, it has been the source and cause of this mission. Starting in 2022, the mandate has been updated and widened to make sure that we support the government bodies of Ukraine, including the Ministry of the Interior, National Police, Prosecutor's Office, and Security Service. Our mission currently is devoting a lot of work in the cooperation with our partners in the area of investigating and documenting the international crimes. We are working in the deoccupied territories. It is worthwhile reminding that we are not a humanitarian mission. We don't support mainly civilians, but when we work in the deoccupied territories, this is where we support the local governments at the areas where Ukrainian government bodies are coming back, and in the areas where we set up the dialogue between the government and the communities. This seems to be very important, that at the occupied territory, the community believes the law enforcement bodies to make sure that the normality comes back, development is taking place, and shall I say, an attempt has been made to live out and live up to the tragedy that the Russian war has brought here. Let me inform you that the mandate has been renewed in the mid-May. The Council of the European Union on the 14th of May has green-lighted a decision on the continuation of the mission with the priorities in investigating international war crimes, including war crimes per se. War crimes, of course, is one of the 4 kinds of international crimes that we are dealing with and qualifying under the Rome statutes. We are working with all kinds of international crimes. Of course, the occupied territories are in our focus, where we work both in these territories and in the adjacent territories. It is important to work not only in the territory that were occupied, but we also support the territories that have not been deoccupied but are living next door to such territories. Main challenges of our mission today is to share expertise with our law enforcement partners regarding the proper documentation for the perpetrators to be brought to justice at different international jurisdictions and courts. Our colleagues have a very serious background in the area of the so-called community policy, working in the local communities. We are very actively working with the law enforcement to set up a civil dialogue. Our experts also provide trainings and workshops on the psychological rehabilitation of both law enforcement officers who are under a tremendous stress when they gather the remains of their colleagues and those of the civilians. These people are at the verge of psychological burnout. It's very important for them to be rehabilitated, to put together their human resources to work for the good of Ukraine. That is to say, European Union is with Ukraine, stands with it. We are one of the tools to support Ukraine, and hopefully that very soon we'll be working on the restoration of Ukraine after the deoccupation of all territories. So, Oleksandr, I would like to turn to you. You are a person that understands so deeply and with first-hand experience, because you're still there in the field. Let us talk about the situation in the Kherson region. What's going on as far as the reconstruction and restoration is concerned? We believe that one of the priorities is to get people back to the deoccupied territories. How does that sound to you? Is it now a pressing issue, the return of the people? Are there places for the people to come back indeed? Welcome, dear colleagues. I would like to begin with the statement that I've been here since day one of the deoccupation, which took place starting 11th of November last year. Our plans were very ambitious and rosy. And we were also thinking about the left bank of the Dnieper River. It has not come to fruition, but we also know that this we will see the day when all the territories will come back to Ukraine, will take back all the occupied territories, and people will be coming back, not only from the occupied territories, but from abroad as well. But we have what we have. Very sadly, in our region, more than 2/3 of our region, including the right-hand bank of the Dnieper River, are under constant shelling of different sorts of mortars and drones and multi-launch rocket system. The other part is relatively peaceful, including different settlements, but this is only part of the territory that have been deoccupied. This is why we can talk and look into how that housing will be restored. It is very difficult to say now about the reconstruction per se. When people heard in spring the call to come back, of course they were willing to see their households, to restore your houses and plant the seeds of new harvest. We wanted to make sure that these settlements were secure. In the right-hand side of the Dnieper, we have about 7% of people remaining there, mainly people of the older generation, people who are not willing to leave their households under any circumstances, so that we are bound to ensure their security. They have the points of resistance where we provide all the necessary assistance that we can afford, including charges of the telephones and providing different kinds of consultations. Of course, electricity is not available there because those territories are under constant pummeling, and about 40 settlements are void of electricity provision. There is a major problem, of course. In general, we have renewed about in 128 settlements they don't have any electricity available. And indeed, when we talk about the restoration, we are doing what we can in what is relatively secure settlements. We saw the program called Shoulder to Shoulder, and we were rebuilding 24 settlements to begin with, a number that grew up to 101 settlements in the right-hand side of the bank of the Dnieper River. Hopefully, we will see that program up and running. About 35,000 families have received a financial assistance amount to more than 1 billion hryvnias as a set-off for their damaged housing. As far as the left-hand bank of the Dnieper is concerned, people are still held hostages there. All the circumstances that the Russian army has created makes it very difficult for people to leave their territory. It's difficult to find them a place for living or to have their damaged housing registered. They are forced to work. They are frightened with the forced issuing of Russian passports. They are getting ready for new steps, and the foods are 3 times as expensive as they are in the Ukrainian, the occupied territories. Medicines are very expensive as well, and they're either poor quality, and the medical service is not efficient because all the medical personnel have left, and there is no one to provide medical service, either of the first aid or second aid. So people have to count on themselves, on their neighbors, on what they have grown in their backyards. They are forced to use the power banks as the electricity supply. We receive calls for the hotline. Another problem that we are seeing is that for 3 months now, some strata of population have not been paid, including their pensions that they are entitled to. And families with many children is in those categories. The Russian army continues to pressure the pro-Ukrainian population. We see constant reports that can be officially verified, but we receive some messages that people are missing. And again, we will see the fifth year when the Russians blew up the Kakhovka Dam in a week's time. And again, this is the place that, as the result of that tragedy, there were a lot of civilians missing. And we received information from our communities that the occupiers were burying the people in the mass graves. In the local hospitals, the collaborators diagnosed people who died as a result of flood. They were diagnosed as a cardiac attack. So we are seeing a lot of challenges that we will be seeing after the deoccupation. We are likely to see very challenging situations. In the left-hand bank, the situation will be worsening. The only solution is to have those territories deoccupied. Thank you, sir. I would like to turn to the next speaker. One of the challenges that we have seen in the deoccupied territories is the imprisonment of the civilians and detention thereof. This is something we saw since 2014, but such crimes have become widespread since 2022. What are the challenges we are facing in this area? What do we do to have those people freed? One should remember that apart from the people who were living there as free citizens, as private citizens, apart from those, we had the non-freedom areas, including different pre-trial institutions or different kinds of institutional bodies. These were different children's institutions. In Kherson, for example, at the Oleshki settlement, there is a unique children's home. We know how these children were abducted and found themselves at the psychiatric clinics in the Crimea. We should be mindful that apart from the people who have been detained, arrested, or abducted, majority of them is one group. Group number one, the leaders of public thought, businessmen, journalists, including local politicians and the heads of the local communities, the priests who are occupying leaders' role in their communities. They were the first victims, including journalists, when whole teams of journalists were made to share false information because the occupiers understood that they were leaders of the public opinion. Of course, this is part of the war crime that we are documenting currently, and the coalition called the 5th AM that is working on the documentation on different crimes. We have claims to President Putin that includes more than 1,000 episodes. In particular, the detention, hostages, captives is not a legal term. Legally speaking, these are called illegitimately held. This is their judicial status. It has been officially defined. And once you are enjoying such a status, we know about the procedure to follow how to define such persons. This is where Russia has created a de facto new kind of war crime. What they are doing to the civilians in the occupied Ukrainian territories does not have any analogy and has not been described in the international humanitarian law. What we are facing is following. We're talking about the international humanitarian law, the simultaneous prisoner swap. We imagine this to be a number of captives is swapped for another number of the captive. This is the black market philosophy. A lot of situations around the world has shown that such a swap leads to a situation that the terrorist country is grabbing as many people as they can. They are interested in that. This is why we are talking about one-time prisoner swaps. When we talk about the ceasefire, must be paralleled by the freeing of all for all. That is to say, they free all the captives they have, we free all the captives. We know that swaps are of different kinds. We are not grabbing civilian of Russia to ensure the prisoner swap, because Ukraine is not a terrorist country. We shall not behave as the Russians do. This is why when now we receive the civilians as the result of the swaps, more often than not, this is very much unexpected. But when we are talking about the occupied territories, everything is super complex. It's not about the so-called Donetsk or Lugansk People's Republics or in Crimea, where the Russian institutions are now set. When the case, as the Sentsov case has shown, when we talk about Mr. Mikiro, a person who without one limb, insular and dependent, he has been sent from Simferopol. He was the only Crimean Tatar amongst all the military swaps. They believed that this is the way to go. When we talk about the left-hand bank side of the Kherson region, the occupying power said that they have institutionalized their system, but indeed the courts are not there. We cannot refer documents. We cannot send our lawyer there. The civilians that are held there, not all of them are sent to the Russian Federation. These people that are held there don't have any access to relatives, to their lawyers. No investigation is taking place. They have not been informed of any charges. That is to say, they are held illegally. The situation is uber complex. Another major issue is that people who were taken care of by the Ukrainian state and they were held at institutions, we now know that many of them were sent to the Russian territory. And in the future, it is likely that we will have to search for them. When we talk about the Ukrainian civilian imprisoned persons, it is important for their relatives to call to the coordination headquarters on the treatment of war prisoners. We will be assisting in all the registration procedures and so on, because there is a series of demands, including the demands of the International Red Cross. It is very important for us to understand how important it is. Unfortunately, Ukraine does not have an access to those territories. To make sure that Ukraine as a state understands that there is a missing person, it is only through their relatives who cannot contact their loved ones. We know that a person is missing. We have now 1,000 calls at the center of the Civil Liberties. This is the number that we know, and we are sure about that number. But the 20,000, and we believe there are about 60,000 Ukrainians that are captive of one or another kind in the occupied territories, or those that have been sent to the Russian Federation. But because they don't reply to our calls, and sometimes 1 out of 10 will be responded to. This is the internal information that we are receiving from the relatives, that they have lost contacts with their relatives or their close ones. This is how we know that people must be searched for. I beg you, please turn to us. We will help you in all these processes, and it will be easier for Ukraine to understand for whom we shall fight on the political and diplomatic fronts, because freeing means to get rid of the Russian occupier, which means the fight for those who have been deported into the Russian Federation or into Belarus, where we are also finding our captives. The other option is political pressure, diplomacy, to create a third country capable of participating in such negotiations. This is a major work that both government of Ukraine and NGOs of Ukraine are doing. Khrystyna, I would like to turn to you. Another heinous crime that we have seen since 2022 is the deportation of the Ukrainian citizens. We are likely to remember that we will mark the 20th anniversary of the deportation of the whole people of Crimean Tatars. We thought it was impossible for such a history to repeat itself. The occupiers think otherwise. What are the challenges here, and what are we doing in terms of returning such people? Well, my colleague has set off talk about people that are called partly deported. What is deportation? It means that against your will, you have been taken to another place. Part of the deported people are civilian hostages. According to the UN data, 2.8 million Ukrainians have been deported to the Russian Federation. But you will know what Russia is. An exact number will not be available. They count, in general, those who have crossed the border in their direction. We are not aware whether these people left to Europe from Russia, because European countries don't count people coming to them from the Russian Federation. How did they get to the European Union countries, either through Ukrainian border or through the Russian border? That is to say, we cannot say what the future of these people will be. We are well aware that the Russian Federation does not provide any data. Another point I would like to focus on is the deportation of children. And this is because this is the issue that, unfortunately, as an advocacy manager of the Where Are People organization, I often visit the United States, and I talked to the people from the UN. Last time that I talked to the Ukrainian children coming back from the deportation. I understand that international community understands this problem very narrowly. To show and share with you one's history, it's a heartbreaking story because it concerns children. In my personal view, it's a heinous story. Ilya is 11 years old. He comes from Mariupol at the beginning of war. He was a living kid living in Mariupol. As the war broke out and their house was bombarded, they tried to hide with their neighbors. While on their way, a rocket came in. He was wounded in his land. His mother was wounded in the head. And they came to their friends. And his mother died in his arms, lying on the bed. That is to say, this 9-year-old didn't understand that his mother was dead until the neighbor came and tested her pulse. And he said, your mom is dead. And then as he is missing the upper part of his leg, he was deported by the Russian army into Donetsk. There he was told that he would go to live in the Russian Federation, and he will be adopted there in hospital. As far as his story is concerned, they wanted to have his leg amputated, and this kid, under such circumstances, said that he was supposed to speak Russian. He was a Russian citizen now. He will enjoy a bright future in the Russian Federation. He was broadcast on the Russian television, and his uncle, his mother's brother, saw him. He was living in Europe. His grandma was living in Western Ukraine. They both left when the territory was being annexed. And his grandma, in spite of all odds, got hold of the kid. He's a traumatized person. There were 3 children coming from Mariupol, and we came to the United Nations. First, Ukrainian children to address the United Nations. And when diplomats were hearing to them, they were crying. The interpreter was crying because another kid by the name of Sasha, and I'm not going to take too much of your time, he was separated from his mother at the filtration camp. He was separated from her because she was married to a military. And this kid has been searching for 2 years for his mom. The only thing he is asking for is to find his mom. And all the diplomats, in their hundreds, half of them began to cry. I don't know how this kid can be assisted. We were asking Hollywood stars. We were asking senators from the American Senate. And we cannot find his mom. The only institution that can find his mom is the Ukrainian army. There's only one body. 100% of ensuring is winning this war. We will get the data. We will be able to find these kids, these adults, all these civilian deported persons and civilian captives. We have heard now, do we have 60,000, 150,000 of those civilian captives? 20% of the occupied territories. These are potential captives, kidnapped children, and the victims of torture. They are not enjoying any rights. Anything can happen to such persons. Such children can be enlisted into any paramilitary military unit and to become a Russian soldier. You see, Russia does not know moral. They don't know rules. Russia doesn't have anything. They don't have anything resembling to legality. All the people staying there can face any future. They can be killed, and no one will be held responsible for that because there is no law in the Russian Federation. The sooner our Western allies hear us, help us, provide armaments, the sooner we will be able to put a full stop to this story, because Ukrainian army is not fighting for our territory. As Yulia has suggested, this will not mean the end of this story. We will go to the Russian jails to free our people because they are imprisoned only because they're Ukrainians. I can talk for ages. I don't want to abuse your time. I have made my point. My point is that according to Ms. Vereshchuk, currently there is 1.5 million Ukrainian children in the occupied territory. Every single of them can be taken captive any day, any minute, any second. It's not a matter of those who have been illegally adopted or illegally taken to the Russian territory or illegally imprisoned. It's a major problem. Until this story has been put to an end, until we destroy the Russian army in the combat, this story for the Ukrainian children will be going on. Ukrainian families will rejoin our army, will come back, and the civilian captives, all the Ukrainians, will be enjoying a happy life under the peaceful heavens, enjoying peace. Yulia, you are representing an NGO working to assist the return of the Ukrainian captives to come back from the Russian captivity. Let us draw a line under our talk here. What are the mechanisms that will allow us to return the prisoners of war from Russia? In general, I echo what has been said so far. My colleagues said that, of course, the victory of Ukraine will solve a lot of issues, including deportations and prisoners of war. But from the standpoint of the families, I will tell you this. We don't have data. We don't know how many people are held hostages, how many civilians are held captives, how many children are there held by the Russian Federation. But we also don't know when the victory will be secured. We are sure, but we don't know the day. We don't know whether these people live up to the date of our victory. We don't know whether children will see their parents and parents will see their children that are held captive in Russia. This is an open question because there is no mechanism there. What we are seeing now is that while talking to the Ukrainian government, we know that they hear us, they understand the issue. However, we are working on this. The working group is up and running at the coordination headquarters. This group is now dealing together with the General Prosecutor's Office with the issue to make sure that the International Crime Court will see the cases that Russia is a terrorist state, they commit war crimes. It will also include civilians because it is against civilians Russia is committing war crimes. This is what we have to share with the international community. But it must be done in parallel with other process. Until we have civilians coming back, we won't have evidence. We will not have the names of the people who have committed such war crimes that must be seen to be held to justice. It is important for those who have been liberated. And because they have been degraded there psychologically, I'm leaving behind this equation the physical torture. They have been psychologically tortured. They cannot defend themselves. It is important for them that perpetrators are held to justice in one way or another, even if some years pass by. Such responsibility must be effected. These are the processes that must be going in parallel. The returns, the setup of the mechanisms. Of course, Ukraine is waiting for the help of the international partners. These are the partners and the states that can exert pressure upon Russia. It's important for us as families and for the NGOs to prove these cases and to share such information. There is an understanding problem here because even the Ukrainian society is not fully aware of the challenges. We are facing the issues when the Ukrainian society don't understand who civilian captives are, because that they're equal to the prisoners of war. We are fighting now to make people understand that prisoners of war are treated as equal to the civil captives, because when they are held in Russia, they are equal in their condition that they're suffering from. The Ukrainian society, unfortunately, doesn't seem to understand who the civilian captives are, why they are held in captivity. This is one of our challenges, to bring this to the Ukrainian awareness. This is important for the issue to be resolved both within the Ukrainian territory and beyond at the international platforms. That is to say, that my vision is everything must start with the Ukrainian society, share the information with the international community to be followed by a final result that is likely to bear fruit. People will be coming back. The result will be a cooperation of the Ukrainian society, Ukrainian government, and international partners, because Ukrainian society is also a push for the government. I can talk about my personal situation. I am still waiting for my father to come back, for my housing to be restored. I used to live in the near-front territory. We don't have our house. We don't have a place to live in. We don't know where my father will be coming back to, although we hope that we'll be coming back. Everyone will be facing such problems. We are facing them now, and we are likely to see them for the future. After people are coming back from the captivity, they will be coming back ill, they will be coming back psychologically, and these problems will be with them for the rest of their lives. Dear colleagues, I would like to turn to you for your questions. Welcome, Inter Television. I have a question to Oleksandr, if I may. Are you there, Mr. Oleksandr? Sir, you have mentioned in your statement the issue of the so-called nationalization of the Ukrainian real estate that is situated in the occupied territories. In the majority, the so-called new status concerns the real estate of those who have left the people. According to what I know, it's very active in the other regions. In your region, do you have information how the flats and houses are being taken by the Russian authorities? What is your advice for the Ukrainians who have left the occupied territories? What should they do to retain such real estate in spite of the actions of the occupiers? Thank you. Indeed, in the Kherson region, such practice has been very much engaged by the occupiers. They have been putting together the so-called register of the real estate with the help of the local corroborators. They want to grab as many enterprises and houses and flats as possible. I have also mentioned that this is one of the tools to make people captive, to hold them captive in these territories. That is to say, to squeeze them out. If you are not squeezed out, you will create an environment of humanitarian disaster. You are forced to stay there for your flats not to be taken away. If the occupiers decide to grab the real estate with the corroborators' assistance, it is easy, of course, to grab your assets when you are not there physically. But the issue is that people who have left, it's quite difficult for them to come back. To sell such assets is not possible without passports. We are now in this vicious circle. To sell something, you need a Russian passport. And who can buy it from you? Only Russian occupiers or Ukrainian collaborators. There is no demand there at the market. They're still waiting. The occupiers are still waiting that they will get this for nothing. And of course, there is no law effected as far as Russia Federation is concerned. According to the Ukrainian legislation, these assets still belong to their lawful owners, and it will be brought back to them for all the collaborators' efforts. We are short of time, unfortunately. Kanevsky Media.
Finally, I heard 48 nations. What techniques are being used best to get results for civilians? And also with the situation for civilians being different, are there ways that the third-party countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Turkey are also currently being useful that we can capitalize on and get more results? Дуже дякую.
Якщо можна, я почну.
I will begin, if I may. Shall I speak Ukrainian or English? Are you getting interpretation then? It's a good question. Perhaps there are some technicalities there. It's above my pay grade. If we had evidence from 300, 400 people, mechanisms are there. But sometimes it seems that civilians are liberated. It has happened. At some point, they find themselves at the border to bank on the fact that Russians will understand that this is a war crime is something we cannot bank on. What we are counting on is the active use of the international mechanisms. Russia has not yet left the General Assembly of the United Nations. Russia is still the member of the European OSCE. It's member of the regional organizations. It has economic interests in cooperation with South Africa, India, or China, or Arab countries. Any of those countries potentially can be a negotiator that we will have to set up a contact with. And Ukraine is very active in this. Accordingly, our challenge is to get interested, our international partners, in putting this issue as a priority of their talks with the Russian Federation. I echo what my colleagues have said. It is only possible when we raise the validity of such an issue. Thank you. You have a short remark. We are bound to wrap up this press conference. Friends, thank you very much for your interest in this important issue. I would like to thank the panelists for the important talk. I thank you, first of all, for your important work. We appreciate... Oh, yes, I have seen the hand raised. This is mega important.
That has been raised, the journey... Я хочу зараз наголосити, друзі, у нас є...
My point is that this is a historic point to raise the issue of returning all Ukrainians, old and young, the Crimean Tatar, civilian and prisoners of war from captivity. This will take place in Switzerland at the Summit of Peace. One of the points is particular that area. I agree with Oleksandr. We mentioned a couple of countries, but there may be some extravagant positions from the Middle East to the Latin America countries and Africa, etc. This is very important that this summit has seen the countries. There are 70+ countries have reaffirmed that they will be participating, that these countries commit to effectively and officially affirm their commitment to deal with these issues. We have European Parliament, members of parliament ready to go to Russia, but we are sanctioned in Russia. They will be detained or killed over there. Even under the protection of the laissez-passer, they cannot legitimately go to Russia with the safety in mind. I thank every person who are contributing to these problems and the solution thereof. Yes, indeed, we hope that this summit will come to fruition. Thank you, everybody. Media Center is working towards our victory. Glory to Ukraine.